Exclusive details now in the case involving one of Houston's most notorious serial killers. More than 30 years later, the bodies of two of the victims are being exhumed. Eyewitness News reporter Ted Oberg is live from the medical examiner's office. Ted?
Gina, we were the only reporters there today as anthropologists unearthed two sets of remains today from Woodlawn Cemetery. They know who one is, and they are working now to figure out who the second is and trying to answer these 38-year-old questions about just who Dean Corll killed. Like a lot of teenage boys in the 1970s, Michael Balk had long hair, and his mother didn't like it.
His hair was down here. His mother told him it needed to be up here.
But before her son returned from the barbershop, he was picked up and killed by notorious Houston serial killer Dean Corll. Balk's brother Billy was one of Corll's victims too, and the family thought the brothers were buried here in the same casket decades ago. In all, Corll killed 28 teenage boys in the 1970s, making headlines across the state as his victims were dug up. Anthropologist Dr. Sharon Derrick, then an Austin teenager, remembers reading about it.
What I really remember is opening up the newspaper one morning at home and seeing this front page huge photo of them pulling the remains out of the boat shed.
Decades later, she came to work at the Harris County Institute for Forensic Science, where among her jobs was trying to name still unidentified Dean Corll victims.
And I feel like in some way I'm helping take care of these boys now.
She realized her predecessors made a mistake when some supposedly unidentified bones DNA matched a known victim already in the ground. It led her to the painful decision to dig up a 38-year-old grave, which was finally done today, returning one brother to the grave, removing the second, now unidentified victim.
Hopefully we'll be able to learn who this individual is and give that family an answer.
She'll work to figure out who the unidentified remains are now. The brother who was thought to be here was actually in a cooler at the medical examiner's office all these years, and his remains are now buried in another cemetery. She was able to tell his family that he died after listening to his mother. An old police report showed the boy, eventually identified as Michael, died with short hair.
Listened to his mother, went out and got his hair cut, just didn't come home.
It will take months for anthropologists here to work up a biological profile of the unidentified remains they unearthed today. Then Dr. Derrick hopes to match that profile with some of the short stack of missing persons reports she has from the 1970s when Dean Corll was killing his victims. Live at the Institute for Forensic Science in the Medical Center, I'm Ted Oberg, 13 Eyewitness News.
40 years ago, Houston was coming to grips with a mass murder case that we still don't fully understand. Dean Corll and two teenage accomplices kidnapped, tortured, and murdered at least 29 boys from the Houston Heights.
Now, over the years, we have learned a great deal about this case, but never heard from the lone female survivor. Tonight, we will. Reporter Ted Oberg is live in the Houston Heights. Ted?
Gina, 40 years ago, all those kids were from this neighborhood, and Rhonda Williams was too. She called us recently and said 40 years of silence is long enough. She wanted to tell her story. She is still receiving some threats in connection with this case, and while she wanted to tell her story, she didn't want us to show her face, and so we agreed. Growing up, there really wasn't anyone Rhonda Williams could depend on.
At some point, I was just used to a lot of things that weren't so great.
Williams claims she was raped as a 3- and 4-year-old, in and out of foster care as a child, and suffered silently as she was repeatedly beaten by her drunk, now deceased father.
Screaming is one of those things I would not have done because I knew that would get you in more trouble.
In her teenage years, though, she did count on Elmer Wayne Henley, a boy she knew from her Heights neighborhood. One August night in 1973, Henley heard Rhonda's drunk father threatening her and climbed in her bedroom window to help Rhonda escape.
We creeped down the stairs.
What Rhonda didn't know then was the teenage friend saving her from her father was helping Dean Corll, Texas's most prolific serial killer. Henley drove Rhonda and another teen, Tim Curley, to Corll's Pasadena home. They partied and awoke hogtied in the middle of Corll's rage.
He started kicking me and, said, "Wake up, bitch."
Corll untied Henley, but took Curley and Rhonda into his bedroom and lashed them to his homemade torture board.
I could hear Tim hit the floor.
Still, she wasn't worried.
I couldn't see Wayne hurting me. I just trusted him.
But then Wayne told her
He was afraid that he wasn't going to be able to save me. So he was going to sit down with me, lay down with me like, he'd been doing when we talked. And he was going to put the gun behind my head while we're talking. And then he was just going to shoot me.
Betrayed. Again. But now tied to a torture board between a friend and a madman as the night dragged into early morning.
All of a sudden he came in and Dean was focused on Tim and the gun was on the dresser.
But then, staring down at two of his friends, Rhonda says something snapped in Wayne Henley. Rhonda Williams was not going to be Corll's next victim.
The fact that I wasn't hysterical and I just kept looking to Wayne to get me out of there. He'd always been my protector, so yes, I was like, when are you going to get me out of this?
With the body count then at 29 boys, Wayne Henley had seemingly had enough of Corll's killing.
He stood at my feet and just all of a sudden told Dean that this couldn't keep going on. He couldn't let him keep killing his friends and that it had to stop. Dean looked up and he was really surprised, and so he started getting up and he was like, you're not going to do anything to me. And then Wayne, he had the gun raised already and he just started shooting.
Still tied to the board, Williams watched as Corll fell dead and Henley called police to confess. Over the days and weeks that followed, Henley led authorities on a gruesome trail across southeast Texas, picking up the buried, decomposed bodies of Corll's victims. Henley was sent to prison. Rhonda Williams, jailed and hospitalized for a time, was let go. A judge told her to forget about it and never speak of that night again, a promise she kept until now.
Physically and mentally, it's taken my life from me.
Rhonda Williams is starting to write her own story these days, and she is so tied to this case. She knew not only Wayne Henley, but knew of Dean Corll from this neighborhood. She knew none of the gruesome details, though, until she was tied up on that torture board. One more shocking detail, she still talks to Elmer Wayne Henley, by the way, in prison. How often they talk and why, we'll talk about that tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. If you have questions, let's go to Facebook and talk about this case in just a couple minutes. Live in the Heights, I'm Ted Oberg, 13 Eyewitness News.
Tonight, Ted Oberg investigates a new clue from a 40-year-old serial murder that rocked Houston. It is a tough photograph to see, and you may not want young viewers to watch it.
But investigators still on this case need your help as they delve into the clue from the murder time forgot.
This entire story of sadistic homosexual slayings would almost appear to be fiction. Some of the people who went in were carried out in plastic bags.
And he raped them, ended up killing them, brought them down here and buried them.
Shovels digging into dirt and yielding bodies. But it's not fiction. It's very real.
And you think most of these victims are young boys?
I'm pretty reasonably sure they are.
There could be dozens of other bodies.
If TV cameras hadn't been there to capture every bit of it,
now listed as one of the most horrifying crimes in this century,
these mass murders would have seemed too gruesome to believe.
Here's your lines right here.
This month, the Houstonians decided to retell the story.
Action.
Houstonian Josh Vargas is directing a film dramatizing the Dean Corll killings. The gruesome murder of 29 boys and young men that we know of.
Wayne wouldn't pronounce the word gone like gone, he'd pronounce it like gone.
Vargas spent years studying the murder spree, eventually visiting Corll's accomplice, Elmer Wayne Henley, repeatedly in prison.
You got this kid who starts off as somebody whose friends are disappearing and nobody knows why, to somebody who's actively involved with the people who are doing the disappearing, to somebody who actually ends it all. And to me, that was where the story lied.
The jailhouse meetings with Henley led Vargas and his production partner Rick Staten to Henley's mother, and eventually to Henley's personal belongings.
I never said there were 30 people.
After Henley confessed, his mother boxed up Elmer's stuff and stuffed those boxes in the back of a school bus in an overgrown North Texas field, where it's been for decades.
We are the first people who went through that stuff in 40 years.
From the back of that bus, Vargas pulled out Henley's actual clothes for his actors to wear, Henley's actual posters to decorate the set with. But that's not why we're telling you about Josh Vargas's find. Sitting in the back of that bus, at the bottom of a rotting cardboard box in a sealed photo envelope, was a 40-year-old snapshot that shook Vargas.
While rummaging through those pictures, this Polaroid falls out. And I take a look at it, and right off the bat, having studied the case and the crime scene photos and everything, I see Dean's toolbox, and I see his implements in that box, and I see this kid right here with handcuffs on his arms. I sat there and I looked at this picture for about 30 minutes, and then I showed it to my wife. I was like, look at this and tell me what you think that is.
A gruesome instant Polaroid.
That is a boy who was horrified, who was laying on a floor.
Likely snapped an instant before the teen was sexually tortured and likely killed. And even though it's never been seen before, it's not worth telling you about just because he found it.
Wayne obviously took the picture.
The reason Josh wants you to see this photograph is the same reason the Harris County Medical Examiner wants you to see it. And it's because no one knows who it is. It's 40 years old, slightly out of focus, blurred by old technology then and time now. But the Harris County Medical Examiner doesn't think it is any of the known victims. And according to the anthropologist working on the case, it's not the one set of unidentified remains. Since Dean Corll never let a victim escape alive, there's only one thing it could be.
I believe it's a victim that they don't know about.
I don't see how it could be anything else.
A young boy, gone for 40 years, forgotten by a city who wanted to put these murders behind them, and overlooked by detectives who decades ago closed this case.
Wayne, get up.
Even if we abandon the film project today, the greatest news we could get would be that at least something came of this, that maybe somebody will recognize their son, brother.
In a prison conversation, Josh Vargas asked Elmer Wayne Henley about that photograph, and Henley says he has no idea who the young boy is, but does believe there are victims yet to be discovered. Lending some authenticity to the photograph, it does seem to match crime scene photos from inside Dean Corll's home at the time. And it was likely taken in 1972 or 1973, since that's about the time Elmer Wayne Henley got his Polaroid camera. If you know who that young boy is, the medical examiner desperately needs to hear from you. Ted Oberg, 13 Eyewitness News.
And as you heard Ted report, the medical examiner's office tells us it tried to match the photo to all known victims, and there's no match. They do want to hear from you, though. We put the picture and the number to the ME's office on abc13.com.
About July 10th, 1973, I tried to call Dean's house, Dean Corll, and it was a long time before I could get him or anyone to answer. Finally, Wayne answered, and I asked him if they had anyone there, and he said yes. I asked him, it's not a friend, is it? And he said sort of. He wouldn't tell me who it was, so I went over there just to see who it was. He was still alive when I got there, but he was tied to the bed. I recognized him only as a friend of Wayne's. The boy wasn't doing anything but lying there when I got there. He didn't have any clothes on. I don't remember them calling him by name, but I have just now been shown a picture of him which I will initial with his date and time, and this is the same boy I have been talking about. In fact, I have seen this same picture before at Dean's house. I was tired, so I went to bed in the opposite bedroom. Before I did go to bed, I took Wayne home, then went back to Dean's house and went to bed. The boy was still alive, but Dean was awake because I remember he let me in. The next morning I went back to get Wayne, and Dean was supposed to pay me $10 for doing this, but he never did. That is, the $10 for taking Wayne home the night before. I'm not sure about the time, but I think it was the next evening when Wayne's mother called. She was drunk and insisting Wayne come home, but he told her no, that he was going to the lake for a couple of days. The boy was still alive. We left about 6 p.m. to go to the lake, and I know he was dead and in a box when we left. So, I must have been there when he was killed because I didn't leave to go anywhere before we left for the lake. However, I do not remember how he was killed. I don't know if I saw it or not. It didn't bother me to see it. I just didn't like to do it myself. I just wouldn't do it myself, and I never did do it myself. We left for the lake at about 6 p.m. and got there about 9:30 or 9:45. We then went fishing, Wayne and me. This was after we slept. We fished from about 6:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Dean told us he had already picked a spot and started digging, but he actually hadn't done very much. When Wayne and I got back from fishing, we ate and I went to sleep. I slept until about 5 p.m. and then Dean and I dug a grave. Wayne was keeping lookout in the van. The spot was by a trench near a dirt road. It was probably a few miles from Lake Sam Rayburn itself. We took the body out of the box. That is, Dean did, and I held the boy's feet about halfway to the grave. The body was already wrapped in plastic. I went back to the van to get the carpet and a flashlight. The carpet is to shovel extra dirt on and take it someplace else so there won't be a mound showing. I almost took too much dirt off, and Dean griped at me for it.